Hi, and welcome to another On the Books with Norm Buffneck Constantine, coming to you from the Bowie Media Studio. I'm here today with Larry Moran. Welcome.
Thank you. Glad to be here.
And now we're going to talk about a number of his works. Larry's a very prolific author, having written Hoosier Hysteria, which is a wonderful collection of short stories, belly laugh kind of short stories. Laughing Through Life, which also is a novel, and then the very first one we've had on the show, really, Larry also has a book of poetry, rhyming love and laughter. So you've been writing for a long time, Larry.
I've been writing since I was about 16 years old, maybe 15.
Okay.
I started writing when I was in high school, working for the Carmel newspaper as a sports writer. And that's where my love for writing came. My first goal in life was to become a Major League Baseball player. When that didn't turn out quite the way I thought it was going to turn out.
I know the feeling, yes.
I turned my attention to be sports writing, and I was a sports writer actually until about the age of 22. I worked for a major metropolitan newspaper as a sports writer. Got to meet some major
In
sports
Indianapolis?
In Indianapolis, right? I got to meet Herb Score. You may not know who Herb Score was.
I do, actually.
Great pitcher for the Cleveland Indians, and later a broadcaster. But at any rate, I started out writing for newspapers, and then when the Indianapolis Times folded up, it went out of business. I moved on and became a political government reporter for 6 years. And when I graduated from Indiana University in 1970, I decided rather than writing about stuff, I would come to Washington, D.C. and save the world.
Okay. Now, that's really exciting. So you grew up in a small Indiana town.
I did.
And how many people were there?
There were 500 people in the town when we moved there in 1951. Today it has 85,000.
Wow.
It has the town fathers annexed a lot of property, a lot of land, and it also population-wise grew. It became a really big, popular bedroom community for the Indianapolis community.
So now you also grew up in a very large family.
I did. There were 10 kids in my family. When we moved to Carmel in 1951, we increased the town's population by 2%. We had 10 kids. We had 10 kids in the family, and it was a wonderful experience.
By the time you all were driving, they must have had to get another stoplight.
They did have to get. There was only one stoplight in Carmel for years and years, and now, well, actually, by the time I graduated from high school, there were 2 or 3 of them. But
I just got. Tell us a little bit about the high school in Carmel. You know, it's Indiana basketball, right?
It was Indiana basketball. It was a great place to go to school. Smallish community. When my sister graduated in 1960, it had 68 people. My graduating class in 1962 had 97. But we were basketball crazy. Everything evolved around basketball. If you went to the barber shop in downtown Carmel, all the guys in the town were sitting around talking about the basketball community. That's what we did.
Okay, now is there anything special about the high school that interested you in writing?
Well, only the people that were there. I'm very much interested in people. One of my stories, Hoosier Hysteria, where you mentioned that you'd read it, is actually a true story about me growing up in the school and a crush that I had on a cheerleader in my class. But there were other people in the school that I found very interesting, and I tried to write about them and bring them to life.
Now, there was one incident in the story that I just loved, and that's when you were at the roller skating rink, and you were trying to fly around the rink, like all of us at that age, to impress a young lady.
Yes.
And tell us what happened.
Well, the thing is, when you're 16 years old, 17 years old, you think everything that's faster is better. And my buddy Dick Bruce and I were racing, literally racing around this rink. I was really good at going on the straightaways, but the turns were more problematic. And I was trying to impress this cheerleader. She was there, and I missed a turn, hit a railing, flipped over the railing, and literally landed on the table, spraying Coke, hamburgers everywhere. There was a couple having a date there, and I was polite enough to pay for their hamburger and Coke, but I did make a mess.
The one thing I wondered about in a store in a town that small, you must have known them.
Well, actually, no. The roller skating rink was actually in the big town of Noblesville, which had 3,000 people. I was from Carmel. We didn't have a roller rink. We only had a stoplight. If you wanted something entertainment, you had to go somewhere else. So there was no entertainment. We did have a seat show. By the way, we called the movie theater the seat show because there were, in those days, drive-in movies.
Yes, I remember the
shows.
drive-in.
Yeah.
I think I saw a movie or two at a drive-in.
Right.
I went to a lot of movies.
Right.
But anyway.
So I did not. So we did not have a roller skating rink. So I did not know that couple. But they were very nice about it after they cleaned.
What I was amazed about was she still had the nerve to try to swoop in on the cheerleader.
Well, actually, I had asked Dick, my buddy Dick Bruce, if he thought Sandy had seen this accident. He said she was not on the rink. So I, as you're 16 years old and you want to impress her, I had this envision. She had not seen me. And I actually literally chased her down about a half hour, 45 minutes later, trying to be really suave and talk to her until I fell down in front of her and tripped her, and about four other skaters, sort of like 6 of us lying on the floor trying to untangle ourselves.
Did she ever talk to you again?
Not too many times.
So humor infuses your work.
It does. I think life is so much fun, and I think that having the right perspective is real important. There are things like those 2 experiences that we just talked about. If you had a negative outlook, they would be devastating. I have a very positive outlook. I found those things funny, and I wanted to share with people.
There's one thing I wanted to ask you. Growing up on the edge of the Midwest in Buffalo, we drink pop.
Right, we did too.
Right,
Yeah.
and there was another scene from the story that was the smell of boiled hot dogs coming from I just loved that.
Absolutely, yeah.
And it's those little details that make writing good.
Yes.
Now, when you worked for the Indianapolis Times as a writer, you weren't a stringer, you were a reporter.
I was a reporter, right.
Okay, tell us how you got that job.
Okay, I started out at Carmel High School writing for the school newspaper, but I was a stringer, which is a person who calls in every Friday or Saturday night to give the major newspapers the scores for the game and give them some of the details. And that's what I did. I did it for the Indianapolis Star, the Indianapolis News, and the Indianapolis Times. Mm-hmm. When I graduated from high school, I needed a job. 10 kids, my dad could not afford to send me off to college, and I struggled for a while, but eventually the sports editor at the Indianapolis Times, who was familiar with my work, and had actually asked me when I went to college to contact him to see if I could be a stringer there. He found out that I wasn't going to go off to college, and he offered me a job as a part-time sports writer, working at the telephones, taking calls from the stringers. So I had a job as a 20-hour-week job working in the sports department, and I needed more income, so he talked to the city editor, and I worked 20 hours a week as a sports writer and 20 hours a week as a copy boy. And that's how I got into journalism.
Okay, and were you entertaining any ideas of fiction at this time?
Not really. Mostly my interest was sports. I must confess, I was a baseball fanatic. I loved baseball back in those days. I knew every player and all that stuff, and that's what I really wanted to be, was a baseball writer.
Okay, so how did you transition from sports?
Well, in 1964, there was a very interesting political election that year. It was Barry Goldwater against Lyndon Johnson, and I actually felt that some of the reporting was biased and not very good, and I thought, well, gee, I can do a better job than that. how 20-year-olds think. And at any rate, when the Indianapolis Times folded up in the October of '65, I decided that rather than writing about sports, a more useful thing for me to do with my life would be to write about politics. And I went out and got a job as a government reporter and a political reporter for the Kokomo Morning Times.
Okay.
From there, I worked there for about 7-8 months, and then I worked for briefly in Muncie, Indiana, and then in the fall of 1966, I went to work for the Bloomington newspaper, and I worked there for the next 4 years as a political reporter. And I actually covered all the major elections. I wrote about all the major figures. I had 2 interviews with Richard Nixon. I was shouted questions at Bob Kennedy when he was running for president in 1968. I had dinner with George McGovern. I actually interviewed Muhammad Ali in a political setting, not as a boxer. He was there on the Indiana University campus for a Black Power conference. And so, yeah, so that's how it evolved. And I really, it was a great experience. It was wonderful.
It's interesting you mentioned Bobby Kennedy. Some friends of mine and I in '66, we were in high school, but we determined he was a carpetbagger. And we literally filled, maybe I'll write a story about it, but we filled an old carpet bag with rags, and then he was still riding in an open car. And as he's coming down the main thoroughfare, we ran out into the street and threw the carpet bag onto the hood of the Cadillac.
Wow.
I have a feeling we'd be dead if
I
we
think
didn't.
you would be dead.
But anyway, so now you're going to enroll at Indiana University. Well, we may have got the timeline a little screwy here, but you enroll at Indiana full-time.
Full-time.
And you're writing full-time.
I was a reporter full-time at this point, yes. I was getting about 4 hours of sleep a night.
And how did you feel about that?
I actually felt great about it. I have to tell you, again, this is one of those perspectives in life. If I might digress for half a minute.
Absolutely.
When I got out of high school and got the job at the Indianapolis Times, I got a room at the YMCA in Indianapolis. That's because it was close to the Times. It was a 8x12 room. It cost me $10 a week. It was barren. It had a bed, a bureau with 2 of the 4 drawers didn't work, and a chair, and that was it. But you know what? I thought I was the king of the world because I was out on my own. And it was the same way at Indiana University. I was working full-time, doing a job I loved to do. I mean, this was just wonderful work, and I was going to school full-time, learning stuff. It was just a wonderful experience. I was tired. 8 hours, 4 hours of sleep a night is not very much, and it was a different experience. By this time, I was married. I was, actually married. You got married in '67, so it was about the same time.
And at Indiana, did you major in English or?
I majored in economics.
Okay.
And the reason why I majored in economics was I was going to major in journalism. Everybody who I knew and I respected said, "You have been a journalist for X number of years. Major in something that you can write about." Politics, about 90% of all politics is about economics.
No doubt about it.
And so I majored in economics for that very reason. When I graduated from Indiana University, my thought process was, and I don't mean this in a negative way about journalism, I love journalism. I thought, well, rather than writing about these things, maybe I can go to Washington, D.C. and help make life better. My view about economics was it's not about numbers. It is about making people's lives better.
Okay.
That's what I thought.
So that's what draws you to Washington, D.C.
Right.
Now, you have quite an output here.
Right.
Were you writing fiction at this time?
I was actually. One of the stories that appears in the collection of short stories is called Sons. And it is a story that was based on a Kurt Vonnegut short story. I don't remember the name of the short story, but in that short story there were these 2 kingdoms that had been at war for generations, and their young man population and their resources were becoming depleted. So the 2 kings decide, we'll have a chess game. Whoever wins the chess game, they are the winner of the war, and the war will end. The twist to this whole thing was that every chess piece was going to be a person, a live person. If that person was captured, he was killed. So one of the kings discovers that he can win this game. He can put the other king in checkmate, but to do so, he has to sacrifice his rook. His rook was his son. And he had to make the decision, should he sacrifice his son and save his kingdom? Now, I don't remember exactly how that story ended, but I thought to myself, what a terrible decision. And it might be worse if you had to choose which of your two sons you would have to let die. So I wrote a story about that very dilemma, and I'm not going to tell you how it ends, but it was one of those things is how would you react in that situation? So I wrote that story. By the way, the story was written in about 68 or 69, before Sophie's Choice was a movie.
Okay, right.
So there was that. But and I wrote these stories mostly for myself. I mean, there were other stories that I was writing, but so I was doing writing, but I wasn't really intending to publish at that particular moment. I had another outlet, by the way. Well, I can mention this to you. I was writing as a reporter. I covered government, I covered speeches, I covered meetings, but I also, because of the place I worked, they let me write humor columns. So I was writing humor columns about politicians. I won't say I was Art Buchwald, but I was writing stuff like that.
I'm not sure how many people in the audience will even recognize that, but yes.
Okay. So I was writing stuff like that. So I had this other outlet, and it was a wonderful experience. So I didn't really feel compelled to try to publish the short stories that I wrote.
But you weren't throwing them away.
I was not throwing them away.
Now, your output, I'm a lover of the short story. I think it's the pinnacle of the craft.
Right. I call it the dessert.
Okay. Yes, I remember reading that in the introduction. Right. It was the dessert. The novels are the dull, stuffy meals. But you not only have written short stories, you've written a novel, and most impressive to me, and I still have to plow through it, are your poems. What took you to poetry?
Well, I started a love affair with poetry when I was 18 years old. When I moved into that YMCA room, that 8x12 room, had no television and no radio. I did have a record player, which I listened to my Brenda Lee records and to my Kingston Trio records and etc. But I had to entertain myself, and so I started reading a lot of fiction, a lot of novels. But that was expensive. I was earning $1 an hour. I know that's amazing, but I was earning $1 an hour.
I remember the minimum wage about that time when it went up to $1.25.
Yeah, and so I was making $1 an hour, and so I had to pay $5 in tax. It was $40 a week. $5 went to taxes. $5 went into my college fund. $10 went for my room. I left $20. Anything I wanted, food, clothing, whatever. If I had to go on a date, that $20 covered it. So I found a used bookstore very close to the YMCA. I would go there, and for between $0.10 and $0.25, I could buy a novel. And this was the amazing thing, I could buy a book of poetry for $0.05 to $0.10. And so, it was cheap. So I bought a lot of poetry, and I made a practice for the next 40 years, every night for 40 years, I would read at least one, if not two poems to myself out loud before I went to bed.
So that takes us to another. Tell us about your practice, how you write.
Well, I'm a person who likes to write about ideas. And some of the stuff that I write about are things that I've read and said, I wonder if we went this direction rather than that direction. Or I'll give you another specific example of a story. In 1971, when I was here in the D.C. area, the Washington News had a picture of the Los Angeles airport, and it was a really bizarre picture at night, at twilight, and the picture showed that there was pollution in the sky. apparently, I don't know if it's still true today, but back then, jet airplanes, before they landed, were required by law to dump excess fuel. This was polluting the area above the airport. Well, I tend to be an environmentalist, and I thought, well, this can't be good. So I wrote in 1971 a story about a time when the sky caught on fire. But you see, you have a little bit of an idea, and I sat down and I would plot it out, and then I would try to find characters that would really make that plot work for me, and that's how I developed stories.
So you're a plotter, not a pantster.
I am a plotter. I am a plotter.
I'm a pantster, I have to admit. In fact, one of my heroes, Stephen King, says people who know the ending before they write the beginning are terrible.
I am terrible.
Okay. Well, you're published. I'm not. But so you write every day.
I write every day. I do. I write or edit every day. I actually have a novel, which I would love to talk about sometime, but I have another novel that's never been published. It was about the 2016 election, and it was quite interesting. But at any rate, I have written at least 3, if not 4 drafts of that complete novel.
Really?
Yes.
So I don't have that kind of patience. 4 drafts. Wow.
Well, the thing is, I first wrote it in 1988. I rewrote it in 2010, 2011, and then 2012. And then I went looking for a publisher. Didn't really succeed in finding the publisher that I wanted. And I probably should have self-published it at that point, but I did not.
Well, that's a great, it sounds like it's a fictionalized Game Change. All those, going through all those edits. So is Hoosier self-published?
It is self-published, yes.
And what moved you to self-publish it?
Okay, well, self-publishing, to me, the publishing game today is so different than it was, say, 40 years ago. Mm-hmm. The major thing that's going on in the publishing industry is that these commercial publishing houses are not making a lot of money. And a lot of them are going out of business. So their view is, we need an audience before we ever sign you to a contract. And there are ways to get there. If you're a professional person that you can really sell your book to an audience, mm-hmm. they might consider you. They might not. They might. If you are self-published and you have shown that your books have been sold to, say, 5,000 to 10,000 people, they might a commercial house might put you on. There are those rare occasions when people who have not been published go to a commercial house with an idea. It's usually a sort of a very popular social idea. I'll give you an example. If you could write a really good book about how an immigrant family was torn apart because some of the family members were sent home, that might attract enough attention, might not, but it might, if it was well written, enough attention that you could get a commercial house to publish it. I actually tried, not with this book, mm-hmm. but with the book Laughing Through Life, that novel, the Laughing Through Life book. I tried to get it published through a publishing house. I had a couple of people who were interested in it, mm-hmm. but I chose not to go with them. Here's why. They wanted me to move the book, story, the setting, to New York or California. Bigger audiences. If you're going to publish a book about Indiana, you're limiting the size of your audience. They actually suggested that I change the names of some of my siblings. Howard is not a name that young people are going to associate with. Could you name him Adam? Could you name Carol, instead of naming Carol, could you name her Madison? I decided that this was a book about my family. It literally is an attempt to honor my family, as well as to tell a very entertaining story. Mm-hmm. And so I decided I will just publish it myself.
So the last kind of question here I'd like to approach, it's actually a two-parter. You care if anybody reads them?
Yes, and no. I do care. Mostly, I wrote these books, a lot of these books I wrote for family members and friends. But I'm as vain as anyone else. And I've made several attempts when I self-published. If you are going to self-publish, there are things that you need to know. One of the things you need to do is to go to a place that has the correct services. One service everybody needs is a good editing service. But I also bought some promotional services. I was on TV at 3 Indianapolis stations, major TV stations, talking about the book Laughing Through Life. And I think it worked. I actually put an ad in the Reader's Digest. But you have to have realistic expectations. I never expected to make the money back from these promotional things that I was buying. It was a very good learning experience for me. And I was able to get some very good literary reviews. The San Francisco Book Review, the U.S. Book Review, those people reviewed my book and were quite complimentary about them. So I found those things very good. Would I love to have 1 million sales and have a bestseller? Sure, I would. Can you do it for me there, Norm?
I don't know. Our audience is growing.
But on the other hand, I wrote those books I wrote them for myself, and I published them with the intent of entertaining specific audiences, my family, my friends, and anyone else who likes to laugh.
Okay.
And so that's what I did.
Okay, and just one final, well, it's not really a question. I'm a school teacher.
Right.
I like kids, but all first writers. What advice would you have to give to kids to start writing?
2 things. They need to write. You'll never be a good writer if you don't write a lot. And number 2, you need to read. You need to read good writers. And if you can do those 2 things, and you're persistent and you're willing to work very, very hard, you can make a career.
Well, that's great. And thank you very much for coming to join us. This was a thrilling interview, and I'm really glad to have somebody who puts a little lifeness into the show. Hope you tune in next week. That's it for this edition of On the Books.
Thank you, Norm.